Welcome to Sleepy Dark Past, the channel where history isn't just a list of dates and dusty old names, but a collection of bizarre, unsettling, and deeply human stories. Told slowly, so you can drift into sleep while exploring the strangest corners of our past. Tonight, we're going back to the heart of the Roman Empire, a civilization that ruled the known world with iron, ambition, and the blood of its enemies. But behind the glory of legions and emperors, behind the marble temples and triumphal parades, lies a secret so disturbing it almost sounds like horror fiction. Roman soldiers and ordinary citizens once drank the blood of fallen gladiators, believing it could give them strength, heal disease, and even cheat death itself. In this episode, we're going to peel back the layers of that chilling belief, from the gruesome rituals that took place after the games, to the widespread superstition that a warrior's courage and vitality could flow into the living through his blood. We'll explore how gladiator blood was used as a miracle cure for epilepsy, how it was thought to boost vitality and stamina, and why entire crowds would scramble into the arena just to taste a single, still-warm drop from a dying fighter god. And along the way, we'll confront a deeper question. How could the same people who built aqueducts, engineered concrete, and invented modern law also believe in what we might now call blood magic? The answer says more about human nature than you might think, because even today, we're still chasing the same illusions of strength, youth, and immortality. Only now, we pay for them in clinics instead of arenas. So if you love dark, strange, and unforgettable stories from the past, hit subscribe and join us here on Sleepy Dark Past, because behind the polished marble of history lies something much darker, and it's waiting to whisper you to sleep. The afternoon sun burns bright over the eternal city. Its light bounces off marble streets and gilded statues, flooding the air with a golden glow. In the distance, a deep roar rises, tens of thousands of voices chanting, laughing, screaming. The Colosseum, that monstrous masterpiece of stone and steel, is alive once more. Today, Rome feasts on its favorite meal, blood. But this is no simple entertainment. To the Romans, the arena was more than sport. It was theater, religion, and state propaganda, all rolled into one. It was where slaves became legends, where emperors secured the love of the mob, and where life and death were reduced to spectacle. They called it munera, duties or offerings. In the beginning, these bloody rituals were staged to honor the dead. The logic was simple. If you wanted to pay tribute to a fallen noble, you threw two men into an arena and had them butcher each other. Because nothing says, rest in peace, quite like a public disembowelment out by the height of the empire. However, the games had evolved far beyond funerary rites. They had become political theater, the bread and circuses, panem et circenses, the poet Juvenal mocked so bitterly. Whenever grain supplies ran low or the treasury bled dry, the emperors knew exactly how to calm the restless masses, give them a free show drenched in blood. And oh, how the crowds loved it. They loved the clang of iron on iron, the hiss of arrows, the metallic stench of death hanging thick in the summer air. They loved the pageantry, the chariots, the parades, the trumpets. They loved the slow dance between life and annihilation. It was intoxicating, mesmerizing, and utterly horrifying. Yet beneath the roar and pageantry, beneath the sand slick with blood, another ritual unfolded, quieter, stranger, and far more disturbing. When a gladiator finally fell, when the last breath rattled out of his broken body, the show wasn't over. That's when another kind of frenzy began. Spectators surged forward. Some clambered down from the stands. Others bribed guards or even risked beatings to rush into the arena. What they wanted wasn't a piece of armor or a lock of hair. They wanted blood. Yes, blood. Fresh, warm, still steaming in the midday heat. In the heart of the Roman Empire, citizens, not some distant barbarian tribe, but the people who built aqueducts and roads, who codified law and philosophy, drank the blood of dead gladiators. They believed it could heal the sick, strengthen the weak, and infuse ordinary mortals with the courage of warriors. To modern ears, it sounds insane. But in the ancient world, blood was more than fluid. It was life itself, the seat of strength, vitality, and spirit. The most respected physicians of the Roman world, like Galen, taught that the human body was governed by the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Humor, from the Latin humor, meaning fluid, was the medical term for the bodily liquids thought to control health, and temperament. Balance the humors, and you were well. Let one dominate, and sickness crept in. Blood, above all, was sacred. It was the essence of life and virtues, a word that meant not just manliness, but a potent mix of bravery, moral excellence, and power. Romans believed virtues was a transferable force. And what better source of it than the blood of a man who had faced death unflinchingly, who had killed and died before roaring crowds? And so they drank. The sick were especially eager. Epilepsy, called morbus sacer, or the sacred disease, was one of the main illnesses treated with gladiator blood. It was sacred, not because it was holy, but because it was terrifying and inexplicable. Romans believed epilepsy was caused by divine punishment or malignant spirits. And since blood was the essence of life, it might also drive those spirits away. Writers like Pliny the Elder describe scenes that feel closer to a horror movie than a history book. The moment a gladiator collapsed, epileptics would rush forward, bowls and cups in hand, scooping up blood from the sand before it cooled. They drank it still warm, still pulsing with what they believed was divine vitality. Others smeared it on their skin or mixed it into potions. One physician even suggested drying a gladiator's liver, grinding it into powder, and swallowing it as medicine. Yes, the same civilization that gave us concrete and underfloor heating also invented the human liver, smoothie. And it wasn't just the sick. Soldiers, too, believed in the power of blood. Many thought that even touching their lips to the blood of a fallen warrior could imbue them with his courage. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a pre-workout drink, except instead of whey protein, it was human plasma. It's grotesque. It's absurd. And it's deeply human. Because beneath the gore and superstition, this wasn't really about blood. It was about fear. Fear of weakness. Fear of illness. Fear of death. If blood was life, then maybe, just maybe, swallowing it could buy you more time. And in a society obsessed with power, conquest, and domination, nothing was more humiliating than being powerless. If you're shaking your head at the madness of it all, consider this. We still do it. Today, people inject themselves with stem cells, take hormone treatments from questionable sources, and pay thousands for vampire facials, beauty treatments that literally involve smearing their own blood on their skin. Have we really changed so much? Or have we simply traded the arena for the clinic, the chalice for the syringe? Either way, the Romans did it first. And for them, it was no joke. Blood was strength in liquid form. It was courage in a cup. It was a chance, however small, to borrow another man's power. And when you stand at the edge of life and death, sword in hand, who wouldn't want that? If there was one thing Rome valued above all else, it was power. Not just the power of armies, or of emperors, or of gold, but the power to bend the world to its will. And nowhere was that hunger more visible than in the Roman legions, the most disciplined, efficient, and terrifying military force the ancient world had ever seen. They were the machine that conquered continents, toppled kingdoms, and carved a 1,000-year empire into the bones of history. But even the mightiest machine runs on belief. And the Roman army, for all its discipline, armor, And steel was no different. Behind the rigid formations and precise tactics lay a deep well of superstition, ritual, and psychological warfare. And at the center of many of those beliefs was blood. For the Roman soldier, blood was not just something he spilled on the battlefield. It was something he consumed, something he wore, something he believed in. Blood was power in liquid form, a sacred elixir that could harden the spirit, fortify the body, and tether the soul to victory. And in a world where battle meant not just life and death, but honor and disgrace, anything that promised an edge, no matter how grotesque, was worth embracing. The ritual of strength. Before a campaign, it was not uncommon for soldiers to participate in small, semi-religious blood rituals. Some drank the blood of sacrificial animals, believing it would grant them strength. Others dipped their blades in blood before a battle, baptizing their weapons in life force. And on rare occasions, when a gladiatorial combat coincided with a military festival, soldiers would even collect drops of blood from the arena to smear on their armor or mix into their wine. A symbolic act of absorbing the courage of the slain. These weren't mere superstitions whispered among common soldiers. Commanders and generals often encouraged them. They understood that belief could stiffen resolve in ways training never could. A legion that believed itself blessed, one that thought the blood of the brave flowed within its ranks, was a legion that fought harder, marched farther, and endured more than logic alone would allow. And perhaps the strangest belief of all was this: blood could make a man fearless. Roman texts describe soldiers anointing their brows with blood before battle, convinced it would erase fear from their minds. Some even believed that mixing a few drops of blood into their rations would feed the soul, strengthening not just the muscles, but the virtues, manly courage, that defined a true warrior. It was ritual and placebo in equal measure, but the psychological effect was real. Men who believed they carried the strength of the fallen fought as though they were invincible. Blood as a badge of honor. In Roman military culture, blood was also a mark of worth. Wounds sustained in battle, the blood shed for Rome, were badges of courage, proudly displayed and even exaggerated. A scar across the chest or arm was not just a memory of pain. It was proof of devotion, a visible sign that one had paid the price in blood. This mentality bled into ritual too. Victorious generals returning from war often led triumphal processions through the streets of Rome, their soldiers sometimes daubed in the blood of enemies as they marched. It wasn't just barbaric theater, it was psychological dominance. Blood said, "We are stronger. We are chosen. We are unstoppable." The enemies of Rome, seeing these rituals, often felt their morale wither before a single spear was thrown. To them, Roman soldiers seemed less like men and more like avatars of Mars himself. Warriors who not only spilled blood, but consumed it, wore it, and drew power from it. This wasn't just war. It was spectacle designed to terrify. Blood as psychological warfare, the Romans were masters of fear. They understood that wars were won, not just with swords and shields, but with symbols and stories. Blood was one of their most potent weapons. Some units carried small vials of gladiator blood into battle, using them as talismans. Others anointed their standards and banners with blood before a siege, believing it would bless the campaign. Prisoners destined for execution were sometimes drained of their blood before battle, the liquid mixed with sacrificial wine and offered to Mars, a grim reminder to both the gods and the enemy of Rome's ruthless resolve. Rituals were not just for show. They shaped how soldiers saw themselves and how their enemies saw them. A legion that believed it was infused with the strength of the slain was not merely an army. It was a force of nature. And for enemies who had heard tales of Roman soldiers drinking blood and bathing in the lifeblood of their foes, the very sight of those crimson-stained standards could break their will before the fighting even began. Blood and the myth of invincibility over time. These beliefs created a myth, the idea that Roman soldiers were more than human. They were the chosen of Mars, vessels of virtues, protectors of an empire destined to rule the world. And blood, shed, consumed, and sanctified, was proof of that destiny. There's a certain irony here. For all their engineering brilliance and military science, the Romans were still deeply superstitious. They measured the heavens, built siege machines, and mapped continents, yet they also believed that a few drops of blood could change the outcome of a war. But perhaps that's the secret to their success. Rome didn't just fight wars with steel. It fought them with faith. And faith, as every empire learns, is far more powerful than iron. It's tempting to dismiss all this as foolishness, the desperate grasping of men who didn't understand biology or psychology. But belief has a strange way of shaping reality. Soldiers who thought they carried the courage of the dead often did fight harder. Armies that believed themselves blessed often were harder to defeat. And enemies who believed they were facing monsters often surrendered before the battle had truly begun. So when we speak of the Roman legions, their discipline, their tactics, their unmatched might, we must also speak of their rituals. We must remember the blood that flowed not just from wounds, but from cups. The blood that anointed armor and banners. The blood that soldiers believed made them more than men. Because for Rome, blood wasn't just the cost of empire. It was the fuel that powered it. The Roman Empire did not rise on marble columns alone. It rose on battlefields soaked in blood. And for the legions, those hardened men who carried Rome's eagle across 3 continents, blood was more than the cost of conquest. It was a weapon. It was a promise. It was proof that they were chosen to rule. The rituals began long before the clash of swords. Before every major campaign, Roman soldiers would gather for ceremonies that were part strategy meeting, part sacred rite. Sacrificial animals, usually bulls, rams, or boars, were slaughtered before the standards. Their blood, still warm, was poured over shields and helmets, a blessing to Mars, the god of war. The centurions would dip their fingers in the crimson pool and mark the brows of their men with streaks of blood, murmuring prayers for strength and courage. Some units even drank a few drops mixed with wine, a symbolic act meant to drink victory before battle had even begun. This was more than superstition. It was psychology. The ritual reminded the soldiers that they were part of something greater, an unbroken chain stretching back to Rome's founders. It fused the mundane reality of marching and fighting with the sacred destiny of empire. And for many legionaries, the blood on their foreheads was not just blood. It was Mars himself watching over them. When battle finally came, blood remained central to the Roman experience, not just as a consequence of violence, but as an instrument of control. Accounts from ancient historians like Livy, Tacitus, and Plutarch describe Roman armies performing blood rituals amid the chaos of war. After a decisive victory, captured enemies might be executed en masse, their blood offered to the gods in thanksgiving. Some commanders would smear their faces with enemy blood, a sign to their men that the favor of the gods was theirs. Others would anoint the standards, the legion's sacred eagles, with the blood of fallen foes, claiming divine approval for their conquest. One of the most chilling examples comes from the campaigns of Lucius Cornelius, Sulla, the infamous general and dictator of the late Republic. After crushing his enemies in a brutal civil war, Sulla's troops reportedly collected the blood of thousands of slain rebels and poured it onto the altar of Venice, Jupiter in Rome. It was an act of dominance, but also of purification, a symbolic washing away of treason in the lifeblood of the defeated. To the Romans, this was not slaughter. It was justice written in red. The psychological effect of such displays cannot be overstated. For the soldiers, bathing their standards in enemy blood confirmed that the gods were on their side. For the enemy, seeing Roman banners stained with the blood of their kin was terror itself, a reminder that resistance meant annihilation, not only of the body, but of the soul. It was psychological warfare centuries before the term existed. Even the aftermath of battle was shaped by blood. Roman armies often performed rituals among the dead, collecting blood from fallen comrades to carry their spirit home, or from slain enemies to bind their strength to the victors. In some accounts, soldiers would soak pieces of cloth in enemy blood and tie them to their weapons as talismans. Others buried amphorae of blood beneath new forts or encampments, believing that the essence of their enemies would protect them from future attacks. Perhaps the most disturbing practice of all, however, was the ritual of devotio, a form of self-sacrifice performed by certain commanders. A general who vowed devotio would dedicate his own life and the blood of both armies to the gods of the underworld. Then he would charge headlong into enemy lines, seeking death to secure victory. His blood, mingled with the blood of friend and foe alike, was believed to bind the outcome of the battle. And though rare, devotio was considered one of the most powerful rituals a Roman could perform, a reminder that blood was not just a substance to be spilled, it was an offering to fate itself. Of course, not all blood rituals were sanctioned. On the fringes of the empire, legions far from Rome's watchful eye developed their own traditions, darker, more primal, more personal. Archaeological evidence from Roman camps in Germania and Britannia suggests that soldiers sometimes drank enemy blood directly on the battlefield. In one chilling account from the historian Cassius Dio, after a massacre in Gaul, Roman soldiers were seen mixing enemy blood with wine and passing it around like a toast. Whether this was symbolic or literal is unclear, but the message was unmistakable. Rome did not just defeat its enemies. It consumed them. It is tempting, from the comfort of modernity, to dismiss such stories as barbaric relics of a brutal past. But these acts served a purpose far beyond bloodlust. They bonded soldiers together, forging a sense of shared destiny and invincibility. They terrified enemies, sapping their will to fight. And they satisfied the Roman obsession with cosmic order, the belief that blood must answer blood, that victory required sacrifice, that empire was not merely conquered but consecrated. And if all this seems too savage, too alien to relate to, remember this: we still perform rituals before war. We still bless weapons, still invoke higher powers, still drape flags over coffins, and speak of sacrifice as if it were sacred. The language of blood has not left us. It has merely evolved. For the Romans, it was not enough to win. They needed to prove that the gods had chosen them to win. They needed to believe that each drop of blood spilled was part of a divine equation, one that turned slaughter into sanctity and conquest into destiny. Blood was their weapon, their prayer, their signature on the world. And so, long after the swords fell silent and the smoke of war cleared, the ground beneath Rome's conquests remained dark and heavy, soaked with the blood of enemies, allies and Romans themselves. Each drop was a story, each stain a claim, each ritual a reminder that the empire's greatest weapon was not iron or strategy, but the belief that power, real, enduring power, flowed in red. For centuries, Rome believed in the power of blood. It was the secret ingredient of strength, the fuel of courage, the bridge between mortal and divine. It was medicine and magic, weapon and ritual, proof of destiny itself. And for a long time, that belief seemed unshakable because it worked. Or at least it seemed to. The legions conquered, the emperors ruled, the gods appeared to bless Rome with endless victory. But every belief, no matter how powerful, eventually meets a truth it cannot swallow. And for Rome, that truth was this: blood, no matter how sacred, cannot hold back the tide of history. The The warning signs came slowly at first, like faint cracks in the marble. Rome had stretched itself too far, too fast. Its borders spanned deserts and mountains, rivers and seas. The armies that once swept across the known world now bled themselves dry defending it. And for every battle won with courage and sacrifice, there was another lost to hunger, disease, or the relentless march of time. Blood could fuel a soldier's bravery, but it could not feed an empire. The first great humiliation came in the forests of Germania in 09 CE. 3 Roman legions, led by the brilliant general Varus, were ambushed and annihilated by Germanic tribes under Arminius. Over 20,000 Roman soldiers were slaughtered, their standards captured, their blood soaking into the dark earth. According to some accounts, survivors smeared themselves with the blood of their fallen brothers, hoping to draw strength from them. It didn't matter. The empire's faith in blood and destiny could not change the fact that they had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and utterly crushed by a foe they considered barbarian. It would not be the last time. At Carrhae in 53 BCE, Rome's greatest general, Crassus, marched into Parthia dreaming of glory. His legions believed themselves invincible. After all, they had Mars on their side and the blood of the brave in their veins. But Parthian cavalry, in superior tactics, turned the battlefield into a massacre. Crassus himself was killed, and in a final insult, the Parthians poured molten gold down his throat, a brutal reminder that wealth and blood alike meant nothing in the face of reality. By the 3rd century CE, the cracks had widened into fractures. Plagues ravaged the empire, killing millions. No amount of gladiator blood could cure a disease. Barbarians poured across the borders. No ritual, no offering, no sacred sacrifice could stop them. Civil wars erupted one after another, as generals turned their armies against each other in endless struggles for the throne. Blood flowed freely, but now it fed no gods. It brought no blessings. It was wasted, meaningless, spilled into the dust. Even the soldiers began to doubt. The rituals that once filled them with confidence started to feel hollow. Drinking blood did not save them from hunger. Smearing it on their shields did not protect them from arrows. And as defeats piled up, so too did the questions. Had Mars abandoned them? Had the gods grown silent? Or had blood, the substance they had worshipped, feared, and depended upon, never truly been magic at all? The philosophers of the late empire wrestled with these questions. The Stoics argued that strength came not from external forces, but from inner discipline. The Christians, rising in influence, rejected the old blood cults entirely, preaching salvation not through sacrifice, but through faith. And yet, the old ways lingered, clinging to life even as the world changed around them. Like dry blood on temple stone, the belief refused to wash away. But history is cruel, and it has little patience for old illusions. By the time Alaric and his Visigothic warriors sacked Rome in 410 CE, an unthinkable event to generations of Romans, the empire's faith in blood had become a ghost of its former self. The rituals continued, but they were echoes now, superstitions muttered in a crumbling world. The legions still anointed their standards, but their enemies were no longer terrified. They were hungry, desperate, and determined, and blood alone could not stop them. There is something deeply human in Rome's stubbornness. We, too, cling to our symbols long after they have lost their power. We keep our lucky charms, repeat our mantras, follow rituals whose origins we no longer understand. And like the Romans, we often confuse cause and effect, mistaking coincidence for proof, comfort for truth. Blood had never made Rome invincible. Belief had. But belief without substance eventually collapses under the weight of reality. And so, the empire that once believed itself eternal bled itself to death. Its armies dissolved. Its borders shrank. its temples fell silent, and the rituals that once defined its greatness became relics, curiosities in dusty books, whispers from a forgotten age. Yet the story does not end there, because even as Rome crumbled, its fascination with blood, its belief in the power of life's essence, never truly disappeared. It transformed. It reappeared in medieval relics said to contain the blood of saints. It resurfaced in alchemical experiments to distill the elixir of life. It lived on in the Christian Eucharist, the symbolic drinking of blood for salvation. The forms changed, but the hunger remained. Perhaps that is the final lesson of Rome's obsession. Blood, in the end, is not enough. It cannot hold back plague. It cannot defeat strategy. It cannot outpace time. But the belief in its power, the hope that something physical, something tangible, might grant us mastery over death, that endures. It is as old as humanity itself. And so, even as the empire that built roads across the world collapsed under its own weight, the myth it carried lived on. The myth that inside the body, flowing silently beneath the skin, lies a force that might, just might, let us defy the inevitable. Rome fell, its rituals failed, but the dream of power in the blood still runs through our veins. When Rome finally fell, when the eagles no longer soared over conquered lands, and the legions no longer marched in iron formation, one might think that the empire's strange obsession with blood would have died with it. But it didn't, because ideas, especially those woven into the fabric of human fear and hope, do not die easily. They change. They evolve. And in the centuries after the fall of Rome, blood would reappear, not as pagan sacrifice or battlefield ritual, but as symbol, relic, and miracle. The transition began quietly, almost invisibly, during the empire's last days. As Christianity spread through the Roman world, it brought with it a radically different worldview. Salvation no longer required slaughter or sacrifice. The blood of bulls and gladiators no longer mattered. But blood itself, the essence, the symbol, remained central. In fact, it became even more sacred. The Eucharist, the central ritual of Christian worship, was in many ways the old Roman blood rite reborn. Instead of drinking the blood of a warrior to absorb his strength, believers drank the symbolic blood of Christ to share in his eternal life. A chalice replaced the goblet of gladiator blood, and wine stood in for the real thing, but the language remained almost identical. "This is my blood," Christ says in the Gospels. "Drink it, and you will have life everlasting." The Romans had once believed blood carried strength and courage. Now it carried salvation. This transformation wasn't just theological. It was deeply psychological. Christianity didn't erase the human fascination with blood. It gave it a new, acceptable form. People who would have been horrified by the idea of drinking a dead gladiator's blood lined up, eagerly to drink the blood of Christ every Sunday. And in doing so, they preserved the ancient belief that blood could connect the human and the divine. Only now, the divine was not Mars or Jupiter, but the God of Abraham. The Middle Ages took this fascination even further. Relics said to contain the actual blood of Christ or the martyrs became some of the most prized possessions in Christendom. Kings went to war to capture them. Pilgrims traveled hundreds of miles to see them. Churches were built to house a few dried drops sealed in crystal vials. And the faithful believed that these relics could heal disease, protect cities, and even perform miracles. Once again, blood, now purified and sanctified, was the bridge between heaven and earth. The idea of blood as medicine also survived, though it wore new clothes. Medieval physicians still prescribed blood-based remedies, some inherited directly from Roman practices. They bled patients to balance the humors. They ground dried animal blood into powders and mixed them into tonics. And in a macabre echo of gladiator rituals, The blood of executed criminals was sometimes collected and sold as a cure for epilepsy, a practice that persisted well into the 17th century. The Roman belief that life resides in blood had simply migrated from the Colosseum to the gallows. Even the concept of sacrifice, the shedding of blood to secure divine favor, refused to die. It transformed into the theology of martyrdom. Christians who shed their blood for their faith were believed to join Christ in glory. Their blood was not wasted. It was sanctified. And stories of saints who spilled blood healed the sick or sanctified the land kept the ancient idea alive. Blood was still power, still holy, still capable of transcending death. But perhaps the most striking transformation was cultural rather than religious. In the centuries following Rome's collapse, blood became a language, a way to talk about loyalty, kinship, and identity. Royal bloodlines determined who ruled and who served. Blue blood became a metaphor for noble lineage. Blood ties defined family and obligation. And the idea that blood carried not just life, but destiny, became deeply rooted in the medieval imagination. Even warfare, stripped of the grandeur of Roman legions, retained the language of blood. Knights swore blood oaths before battle. Crusaders believed that the blood they shed in the Holy Land would wash away their sins. And chroniclers described victories and defeats alike in terms of rivers of blood, as though the liquid itself, more than strategy or strength, decided the fate of nations. Yet, for all these changes, the essence of the idea remained the same. Blood was still more than a biological fluid. It was still the vessel of power, the symbol of sacrifice, the proof of divine presence. The Romans had believed that blood could make a man stronger. The Christians believed it could make him eternal. Different gods, different rituals, but the same primal hunger beneath it all. And that hunger did not stop in the Middle Ages. It flowed onward into the Renaissance, where alchemists sought the elixir of life, a liquid said to restore youth and prolong existence. It resurfaced in the early modern obsession with blood transfusion, and it continues today in the modern fascination with stem cells, plasma therapy, and genetic engineering. We no longer drink blood from chalices in dark temples, but the belief that blood holds the key to health, strength, and immortality is still with us, beating quietly beneath the surface of our science and our superstition alike. It is tempting to believe we are more rational now, more enlightened, more scientific. But the truth is, we are not so different from the Romans who once smeared gladiator blood on their faces, or the medieval pilgrims who knelt before a vial of saintly blood. We still look to what flows inside us and wonder if it holds the secret to conquering death. And so, the story of blood did not end with the fall of Rome. It was reborn in churches and cathedrals, in monasteries and marketplaces. It shifted from sacrificial altars to communion chalices, from gladiator arenas to relic shrines. Its shape changed, its meaning evolved, but its power remained. Because blood is more than history. It is humanity itself, in all its fear, faith, and longing, forever searching for a way to turn mortality into eternity. The story of Rome's blood rituals is, in the end, not just a story about Rome. It's a story about us, about humanity itself. It is the story of how far we will go to overcome weakness, to defy nature, to wrestle with the inevitability of death. It is the story of our obsession with what flows beneath the skin, a red river we have chased across millennia, believing that somewhere in its depths lies the secret to power, to health, to immortality. It began with spectacle. In the sand of the Colosseum, beneath the roar of the crowd, men fought and died so that others might drink their essence. The blood of the gladiator was more than a fluid. It was courage in a cup, strength in a swallow, hope disguised as horror. It was the ultimate theft, to take from the dying what they could no longer use and make it one's own. Then blood became medicine. Doctors ground it into powders, mixed it with wine, and sold it as a cure. Epileptics drank it to calm their seizures. Soldiers smeared it on their weapons to channel bravery. The sick sought vitality in it. The desperate sought salvation. And when mere blood was not enough, they turned to organs, marrow, and even the souls they believed lived within them. It became religion. Blood was poured on altars to reach the gods. It was offered to Mars for victory, to Jupiter for justice, to Pluto for peace. It became prophecy and protection, curse and cure. And when Rome fell and new faiths rose, blood did not vanish. It was sanctified. It became the blood of Christ, drunk symbolically for eternal life. It became relic and miracle, worshipped by pilgrims who believed salvation could be found in a single sacred drop. It became empire. Blood was the price of conquest, the ink that wrote the map of the known world. It was the proof of destiny, the evidence of divine favor. It baptized soldiers and crowned emperors. It silenced enemies and fed the ambitions of men who believed themselves gods. It built Rome and it destroyed it. And yet, for all its power, blood could not save Rome from itself. It could not stop the hunger that gnawed at its borders. It could not cure the plagues that swept through its cities. It could not fix the rot within its politics. Blood was powerful, but it was not omnipotent. It could delay death, disguise weakness, even inspire courage. But it could never rewrite the laws of nature. And in the end, Rome, the empire that believed itself eternal, died as all things do, slowly, inevitably, like a heart that simply stops beating. But the belief, that lived on. The dream that strength can be stolen, that life can be extended, that destiny can be swallowed, that never left us. It lingers still. It lives in the modern obsession with transfusions, in billion-dollar industries selling youthful plasma as an anti-aging treatment. It hides in stem cell therapies and gene editing, in beauty products that promise to revitalize your blood. It whispers in the language we still use, royal blood, bad blood, bloodlines, as though what we are is not shaped by our choices, but by the liquid inside us. It surfaces in our myths, our movies, our religions. We no longer drink from gladiator veins, but we still search for the same thing they promised, a way to transcend our limits. Perhaps that's the uncomfortable truth, that despite our technology, our science, and our sophistication, we have not outgrown the Romans. We are still the same frightened creatures staring into the abyss of mortality, still desperate for a way to climb out. We still believe that within us, within the fragile, red river that pulses beneath our skin, there might be an answer, and maybe there is. Not in the blood itself, of course, but in what it represents, the relentless will to survive, to endure, to defy the impossible. The Romans, for all their cruelty and superstition, were not wrong to seek power in blood. They were simply human. And humanity, in its most primal form, will always seek life, even in the shadow of death. So perhaps the story of gladiator blood is not a tale of barbarism at all. Perhaps it is a mirror, one that shows us who we were, who we are, and who we will always be. We are beings who fear death and worship life, who wrap our hopes in rituals and call them truth. We are creatures who will swallow anything, myth, miracle, or marrow, if it promises us one more day. And in the end, maybe that is our greatest strength. So let the Colosseum crumble. Let the blood dry on forgotten altars. Let the echoes of Roman chants fade into the dust of history. Because the story of blood, the story of our desperate, defiant fight against time, is not over. It flows still, in every heartbeat, in every vein, in every dream of immortality. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it. A slow, steady pulse beneath the noise of the world. A whisper that says, There is power here. There has always been power here. The ritual of drinking blood was never just about superstition. It was woven into the fabric of Roman life, a strange thread connecting medicine, religion, warfare, and the desperate human desire to escape weakness. The Romans didn't simply drink blood on a whim. They ritualized it, structured it, and gave it the weight of divine purpose. In their eyes, blood was not a substance. It was a bridge between the mortal and the divine. To understand this obsession, we must step deeper into their worldview. In Roman thought, the boundary between the human and the sacred was thin. The gods could influence the living. The dead could shape the fate of the breathing. And blood, warm, red, freshly spilled, was the medium through which worlds touched. It wasn't just nourishment. It was a vessel carrying strength, courage, and even a fragment of the soul itself. This belief wasn't unique to Rome. Across the ancient world, blood was treated as power incarnate. The Persians sacrificed horses to grant their kings strength. Celtic warriors were said to drink the blood of fallen foes to claim their ferocity. Even in Homer's Odyssey, the dead prophet Tiresias must sip blood before he can speak to the living. The Romans simply perfected this ancient logic. If life dwells in blood, then consuming it means taking that life into yourself. After a gladiator's death, often marked by a shattered skull, a deep puncture wound, or a final gasp in the sand, the arena transformed into a site of ritual. Attendants known as libidinari, essentially the undertakers of the games, would rush in and drag the body beneath the Colosseum into shadowed chambers. There, something far stranger than the fight itself often took place. Sometimes the ritual was spontaneous, a chaotic rush of spectators who leapt from their seats to scoop blood from the ground before it cooled. But more often, it was carefully managed. Physicians trained in the theories of Galen and Hippocrates were known to collect the blood, storing it in small cups or clay vessels. They mixed it with wine or honey to make it more palatable. Occasionally, they dried it, ground it into powder, and prescribed it as medicine. And in some cases, they went further still. Organs, such as the liver, believed to hold concentrated life force, were cut out and consumed raw. It was a practice as gruesome as it was sincere. And yes, people quite literally ate parts of dead gladiators. The Romans even assigned a hierarchy to this macabre medicine. Blood from a victorious gladiator, one who had slain several opponents before falling, was considered the most potent. Blood from a coward or one who died quickly was seen as weak, almost useless. Soldiers sometimes sought the blood of retieri, the agile net fighters, hoping to gain their speed. Others preferred the blood of murmillos, the heavily armored champions, to absorb their endurance and brute strength. Even in death, reputation mattered. The obsession reached its most bizarre form in the treatment of epilepsy. For centuries, Roman physicians believed that consuming blood immediately after death, while it was still alive, could shock the body back into balance. Without modern neuroscience, they interpreted the violent convulsions of epilepsy as the chaotic movement of vital spirits. Blood, as the vessel of those spirits, could theoretically replace or stabilize them. In their logic, it was less barbarism and more biology. Primitive, but internally consistent thought, it became so accepted that public notices were sometimes issued before major games, encouraging epileptics to attend. After all, this was their best chance for a cure. Imagine the sight. A gladiator collapses, blood pooling into the sand, and dozens of people rush forward with bowls, desperate to drink before the life seeps away. Grotesque? Absolutely. But to them, it was medicine, no stranger, perhaps, than the pills and injections we swallow without question today. Yet the ritual wasn't always about illness. It was also about identity. Rome's power rested on conquest, discipline, and the glorification of strength. Weakness was shameful. Frailty was un-Roman. Drinking the blood of the strong was therefore more than a treatment. It was a declaration. It was Rome itself, distilled into liquid, flowing through your veins. There was an even darker belief that blood carried more than vitality. Some Romans whispered that it contained memory, courage, even fragments of the soul. To drink it was to absorb a piece of the dead man's essence. It was a primitive attempt at biological alchemy, a kind of ancient transhumanism, a way to cheat the limits of flesh through ritual rather than science. And if this sounds absurd, remember how similar our own world is. We no longer scramble into arenas to drink blood, but we do harvest organs, transfuse blood, and transplant tissue from the dead into the living. We do it with microscopes and sterilized tools instead of clay cups, but the principle is the same. Life can be shared. Strength can be transferred. Humanity is not a closed system. The most unsettling part of all this is how normal it was. This was not the work of fringe cults or secret societies. Senators drank gladiator blood. Wealthy Roman women mixed it into their beauty treatments. Soldiers anointed their weapons with it before battle. Even emperors, the supposed sons of the gods, partook in the practice. The greatest empire the world had ever seen believed, sincerely and without irony, that power could be swallowed. And perhaps, in their own twisted way, they weren't entirely wrong. Because beneath all the superstition and savagery, this ritual reveals something deeply, stubbornly human, the longing to transcend what we are, to be stronger, to be healthier, to live longer, to stare down death and believe, even for a moment, that we can conquer it. And when faced with the slow decay of flesh and the inevitability of mortality, people will try anything, even drinking the blood of the dead. So when we imagine Rome, we shouldn't picture only its marble temples or disciplined legions marching across the world. We should also picture the quieter scenes beneath the Colosseum, the trembling hands clutching cups of warm blood, the desperate eyes searching for salvation in crimson pools, the ancient belief that inside that liquid lay the very essence of life itself, because for the Romans, it did. The deeper you go into the story of Roman blood rituals, the clearer one truth becomes. This was never just about superstition. It was also about business. Because in Rome, a city that could tax anything, sell anything, and turn even death itself into profit, blood was more than a sacred fluid. It was a commodity. It had a price. And people were willing to pay it. By the 1st century CE, the Romans had built an empire on trade. Spices from Arabia, silk from China, gold from Spain, slaves from Gaul. But within their own borders, a quieter and far stranger economy thrived, one based not on silk or silver, but on blood. And not just any blood. The blood of gladiators. The blood of the strong. The blood of men who had fought and died beneath the roar of 50,000 voices. To understand why, we need to look at how Roman medicine worked. Today, we treat illness as a mechanical problem. Bacteria, viruses, hormones, cells gone rogue. But Roman doctors had none of that knowledge. Their medicine was built on philosophy, symbolism, and observation. They saw the human body as a balance of forces, the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, the vital spirits, pneuma, the influence of the stars. Disease was imbalance. Health was harmony. And nothing symbolized life and balance more vividly than blood. This logic shaped Roman treatments. Bloodletting was common. Too much blood meant fever, so the excess was drained. But sometimes the opposite was prescribed. If the patient was weak, pale, and lacking vitality, then fresh blood, strong blood, might restore them. And where better to find strong blood than in the veins of a man who had fought to the death? This belief spawned an entire market. After major games, it was common for physicians to linger beneath the Colosseum, waiting for the bodies. They bought blood from arena workers, often paying by the cup. Apothecaries, the pharmacists of the ancient world, sold dried blood mixed with herbs as a cure for seizures, anemia, and chronic fatigue. It was not unusual to see small vials labeled sanguis gladiatoris, gladiators' blood, displayed, alongside jars of honey and vials of imported myrrh. Prices varied. Blood from a young, undefeated fighter was the most expensive. Its essence was thought to be pure, its energy stronger. Blood from an older or less impressive gladiator was cheaper, considered less potent. Liver powder, harvested from the organs of the dead, was sold as a powerful remedy for epilepsy and weakness. Some high-ranking Romans even imported blood from distant arenas, paying more for a specimen from a famous fighter. Yes, even in death, gladiators had brand value. The trade extended beyond medicine. Wealthy Roman women mixed gladiator blood into their cosmetics, believing it could rejuvenate the skin and preserve youth. According to one satirical poet, aristocratic ladies paid more for a drop of blood than for a jar of perfume. Soldiers, too, purchased blood in small flasks, smearing it on their swords before battle as a charm for victory. Temples bought it for rituals. Priests offered it to Mars, the god of war, as a tribute. What had begun as a desperate superstition evolved into a full-fledged industry. It's tempting to laugh at the absurdity of it all. 2. Picture senators haggling over blood prices like merchants in a market. But the truth is darker, because for many Romans, this wasn't ridiculous. It was survival. A child with epilepsy, a general weakened by disease, a woman terrified of aging. Blood offered hope when medicine could not. And hope, in any era, is worth more than gold. But profit always corrupts. And soon rumors began to circulate. Were all those vials of gladiator blood genuine? Could anyone be sure? Street vendors began to sell miracle blood from criminals and slaves executed in public. Cheaper, but often spoiled or diluted. Unscrupulous apothecaries mixed animal blood with herbs and sold it as the real thing. In one notorious scandal, a shipment of so-called gladiator liver powder was found to be made from pigs. Even in the ancient world, fake supplements were a thing. And then there was the darker side, the illegal trade. In some cities, poor families sold the blood of their dead relatives to physicians. Rumors spread of criminals drained before execution to feed the growing demand. Rome's black market didn't deal only in stolen goods or forbidden scrolls. It dealt in blood. Yet despite the corruption, despite the absurdity, the market thrived. Because it was built on something far more powerful than logic: belief. People truly believed that blood held the essence of life. They believed that strength could be bottled, that courage could be swallowed, that a man's will to live could pass into another. And belief, especially when wrapped in ritual and tradition, is almost impossible to kill. Looking back, it's easy to scoff. But before we get too smug, let's glance in the mirror. Today, people pay thousands for stem cell therapy, for injections of placental fluid, for collagen supplements made from animal parts. We still bottle vitality and sell it to the desperate. The labels have changed, but the hunger remains the same. For the Romans, blood was not just a cure. It was currency. It was medicine, magic, and commodity, all at once. It flowed from the bodies of the dead into the hands of the living, crossing the boundary between life and death, body and soul, commerce and faith. It was a reminder of how far people will go, how much they will pay for the smallest hope of power, health, or immortality. And so, beneath the grandeur of Rome's temples and the thunder of its legions, there pulsed a quieter empire, one not built on stone or steel, but on blood. And if the streets of Rome ran red, it was not just because of war or conquest. It was because, in the hearts of its people, blood itself was the most precious treasure of all. For the Romans, blood was never just biology. It wasn't simply a liquid that flowed through veins or a crude fuel that kept the body alive. Blood was cosmic. It was sacred. It was the closest thing to the divine that the human body could produce, a bridge between flesh and soul, between mortal and God. And so, beyond medicine and money, blood carried a third, deeper meaning: magic. The idea that blood held spiritual power was woven into Roman religion from the very beginning. Their gods demanded sacrifices: animals, wine, incense, sometimes even human lives. And above all, they demanded blood. To spill blood was to open a channel between worlds. It was a way to speak to the gods, to feed them, to make them listen. Blood was the universal language of offering. This is why gladiator blood, in particular, held such extraordinary weight. Gladiators were not ordinary men. They were warriors who had fought at the edge of life and death. Many were slaves or criminals, but once they stepped into the arena, they were transformed. They became vessels of virtues: bravery, honor, masculine, force, and they embodied the Roman ideals of strength and sacrifice. When they died, they did not simply expire. They were believed to release all that energy, all that courage, all that divine essence back into the world, and their blood was the medium through which it flowed. Priests understood this. So did magicians, diviners, and those who practiced what we might call occult medicine. Blood from a freshly slain gladiator was sometimes collected and offered directly to the gods, poured on altars, mixed with sacred wine, or used to anoint statues. In private rituals, it was smeared on doorways to ward off evil spirits, or painted onto the skin as a charm against illness and death. Some magical texts even suggested writing spells in fresh blood, the idea being that the living essence would make the incantation more powerful. And then there were the darker rites, those whispered about but rarely recorded. Some believed that blood from a gladiator who had died bravely could grant visions or prophetic dreams if drunk during a lunar eclipse. Others believed that the blood of a coward, someone who died screaming or begging for mercy, could bind demons or spirits, forcing them into servitude. In these rituals, blood wasn't a medicine. It was a key, a substance that unlocked doors between worlds that most people preferred to leave closed. This obsession with blood and spirit also tied into Roman ideas about the soul itself. Unlike the Christian notion of a single, immortal soul, Romans often believed the self was divided, a mix of anima, breath of life, numen, divine will, and genius, personal spirit or guiding force. These elements could be strengthened, corrupted, or even transferred. Blood, they believed, was the carrier of these forces. To drink another man's blood was to take in a piece of his genius. To bathe in blood was to cleanse one's anima. And to offer blood to the gods was to mingle one's numen with theirs. If this sounds eerily familiar, it should. Nearly every ancient culture shared similar beliefs. The Egyptians buried their dead with jars of blood to guide them in the afterlife. The Celts soaked weapons in enemy blood to trap their souls. Even early Christians, centuries later, would symbolically drink the blood of Christ during communion. The Romans were not unique. They were simply part of a broader, older tradition that saw blood as the very fabric of life and spirit. But Rome's obsession was more elaborate and more theatrical than most. In some ceremonies, blood rituals were staged as public spectacles. After the games, priests might process through the city with bowls of gladiator blood, sprinkling it on the crowd as a blessing. In certain mystery cults, especially those dedicated to Cybele or Mithras, initiates were drenched in the blood of a sacrificial bull, a rite known as taurobolium. Participants believed the blood washed away sin and infused them with divine power. If bull's blood could do that, imagine what gladiator blood, the blood of a warrior, might achieve. Even the language of Roman religion reflected this belief. Words like sanguis, blood, and spiritus, breath, soul, were often used interchangeably in religious texts. Sacrifices weren't just offerings, they were exchanges. Life was traded for favor. Blood was traded for protection. And every drop spilled was a prayer, written in red dot, of course. Not everyone approved. Some philosophers, particularly the Stoics, mocked the obsession with blood rituals as superstition. They argued that virtue came from reason and discipline, not from swallowing someone else's life. But even they couldn't deny the cultural weight of blood. It was too deeply woven into Rome's psyche, too fundamental to their understanding of power, death, and the divine. And perhaps that's why the ritual endured for so long. Because in the end, it wasn't really about the blood itself. It was about what the blood represented, the hope that strength could be shared, that death could be delayed, that the divine could be touched. It was about control, over illness, over fate, over the terrifying chaos of existence. It's easy for us to look back and scoff at the absurdity of it all. But are we so different? We still speak of spirit and energy as if they're transferable. We still anoint ourselves with sacred oils, still believe in rituals that promise healing or strength. And though we no longer drink the blood of gladiators, we still cling to the idea that something, whether it's a vaccine, a vitamin, or a prayer, can make us more than we are. For the Romans, blood was the ultimate symbol of that hope. It was a whisper from the gods, a spark of vitality, a taste of eternity. And so, long after the last gladiator fell, long after the last arena fell silent, the belief endured that, in the crimson flow of another's life, there might lie the power to rewrite your own.